The coffee was still warm on the table when 21-year-old Marissa Alvarez disappeared into the San Jose night in October 2002. She had just left a familiar coffee shop near campus, walking toward a parking lot under the glow of neon lights. A nearby ATM camera caught her last steps, a blurry figure in a green sweater fading into the dark. Minutes later, she was gone. No witnesses, no goodbyes, just silence. For more than 2 decades, her family lived with unanswered questions, a case that seemed forgotten until new technology and a relentless cold case unit uncovered evidence that would expose a killer hiding in plain sight. Tonight, we take you back through the mystery that haunted San Jose for 22 years and the shocking arrest that shook an entire community. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss the untold stories of cold cases finally brought to light. Marissa had been studying that evening with friends at a well-known coffee shop on the corner of San Fernando Street, a place where students gathered to review notes, share gossip, and escape the pressure of classes. Her friends had left earlier in the night, but Marissa lingered, scribbling in her notebook while the shop slowly emptied. When she finally closed her books, she waved a polite goodbye to the barista and stepped outside just after 11 o'clock. The streets were quieter than usual. A surveillance camera at a nearby ATM caught the final images of Marissa. She moved quickly, as if eager to get home, her eyes darting toward the shadows. In the blurred video, another figure appeared a few steps behind her, tall and indistinct. At her side, parked along the curb, sat a silver sedan with its lights off. To the casual eye, it looked like any ordinary car waiting in the night. To investigators years later, it would become the first crack in a mystery that consumed an entire city. At 11:32, the camera showed Marissa walking toward the lot where she usually parked her car. That was the moment the record of her life seemed to end. There were no more sightings that night, no goodbyes to friends, and no calls home. The girl who always checked in with her parents simply vanished into the San Jose dark. What made her disappearance so striking was how ordinary the night had been. Marissa had no enemies, no secret double life. She was the daughter of Mexican immigrants who had built a modest home in East San Jose since the 1980s. To her family, she was the hope of a brighter future, the first to study at university, a young woman balancing classes with long hours working at a diner to help pay tuition. Her friends described her as gentle, studious, always smiling even under pressure. She loved coffee shop hangouts, late-night study sessions, and the quiet joy of walking home beneath city lights. By midnight, when Marissa had not returned, her parents began calling her phone. At first, there was no answer. Minutes later, the line went busy and then disconnected. Fear crept into their small house as the clock ticked past midnight. At 1 in the morning, they were driving through downtown, checking bus stops and parking lots, calling every friend they knew. By 2 o'clock, they called the police. The officer on duty listened, wrote down the details, and promised patrol cars would keep an eye out. For the Alvarez family, that promise felt thin against the weight of dread pressing on their hearts. In those first few hours, no one could have known that this would be the last night anyone saw Marissa alive. The coffee cup left cooling on her table at the cafe, the blurred ATM footage, the silver sedan at the curb, all became fragments of a puzzle that would torment San Jose for more than 20 years. A puzzle that began not with a dramatic crime scene, but with the quiet vanishing of a young woman whose life was just beginning. By the time the city lights dimmed into the early hours of Sunday morning, the Alvarez family already knew something was terribly wrong. Marissa was never careless with her time, never the type to vanish without notice. She lived by routine. She studied hard, worked her evening shifts at a diner, and always called home when she was out late. But on October 12th, 2002, that routine collapsed into silence. At 2 o'clock in the morning, her father dialed the San Jose police to report her missing. His voice cracked as he described her green sweater, her small purse, the way she had left the cafe near campus around 11. An officer assured him that adults often take time away from home, that it might be nothing more than a late night out. For the Alvarez family, those words felt like a dismissal. They knew their daughter. Something had happened. While the official report was logged, the family launched their own desperate search. Marissa's mother sat by the phone, redialing every number in her daughter's contacts. Friends answered with the same uncertainty. One classmate said she saw Marissa leave the cafe alone. A roommate mentioned a quick text from Marissa earlier that night, saying she would be home late but not explaining why. Beyond those scraps of information, there was nothing. Her father and brother drove through the streets of San Jose, stopping at bus stops, gas stations, and parking lots. They leaned out of the car window, calling her name, scanning each shadow. By 3 o'clock, they were exhausted, but no closer to finding her. The night air carried only silence, the rustling of leaves, and the sound of their own hearts pounding with dread. Meanwhile, across the city, a small detail was captured that would later prove chilling. A witness walking home along Santa Clara Street remembered seeing a silver sedan idling near the cafe where Marissa had been. Its headlights were off, and the driver appeared to be watching someone. The witness thought little of it and continued home. Hours later, when police returned to canvass the area, the car was gone. That fleeting memory, casually mentioned, would grow into one of the most important details of the entire case. At dawn, when the Alvarez family realized Marissa had not come home, the weight of reality set in. Posters were quickly printed with her smiling face and the word "missing" in bold letters. By midday, her image was taped to street poles, cafe windows, and campus bulletin boards. Friends and neighbors volunteered to help, fanning out across downtown with flashlights, checking alleys, parking garages, and the banks of the Guadalupe River. Each time they called her name, the echo came back empty. Local media soon picked up the story. Reporters from the Mercury News stood outside San Jose State University, describing a young woman who was hard-working, kind, and loved by her classmates. On television, anchors repeated her description, urging the public to call police with any leads. By that evening, Marissa's face was everywhere, from news broadcasts to street corners, a haunting reminder that someone had vanished in plain sight. But, despite the outpouring of support, hours turned into days without progress. Police confirmed that her phone had gone silent at 11:48 p.m., cutting off near a cell tower downtown. That single technical clue hinted that she never made it out of the area alive. The Alvarez family clung to hope, but the gnawing truth became harder to ignore. The vanishing of Marissa Alvarez was not a case of a college student running away or taking time for herself. It was something darker, a life interrupted mid-step, a walk home that ended before it began. And as the hours passed, the question that echoed across San Jose grew louder. Where was Marissa, and who was in that silver sedan waiting in the dark? When the clock struck 2 o'clock on that cold October night, the Alvarez family's world fractured. The official police report had been taken, but to them it felt like nothing more than a formality. They knew their daughter would never simply disappear. With every passing hour, their fear deepened, and they refused to sit still while the silence of the San Jose night swallowed their hope. By dawn, Marissa's father had already started printing missing posters on the small printer in their living room. Each page showed her student photo, her dark eyes bright, her smile calm, framed by the words, "Missing, have you seen her?" Stacks of paper piled high on the table while the machine hummed through the early morning. At 6 o'clock, he and Marissa's older brother walked the streets, taping posters to lampposts, to bus stops, to shopfront windows. Their hands trembled as they smoothed the paper against cold metal poles, but they would not stop. Within hours, word spread through the neighborhood. Friends from San Jose State arrived to help. Some carried staplers and rolls of tape, others brought flashlights and bottled water. Together, they fanned out through the city. Groups searched along the Guadalupe River, their beams of light sweeping across the muddy banks. Others climbed stairwells in parking garages, calling Marissa's name into the echoing dark. At Kelly Park, a group of students split into teams, combing through brush and deserted picnic tables. Every corner of the city seemed to hold the possibility of a clue. The Alvarez home became the center of the search. Relatives gathered, their voices low, their eyes filled with worry. The phone rang constantly, sometimes with friends checking in, sometimes with strangers offering vague tips. Each ring made Marissa's mother leap for the receiver, her heart skipping with hope, only to fall again when the voice on the other end delivered nothing of substance. By the end of the first day, Marissa's image was everywhere. Flyers on street corners, posters on campus walls, her photograph taped to the doors of corner markets and bus shelters. Passers-by paused to look at the young woman smiling from the paper. Some shook their heads, whispering prayers, while others promised to keep watch. The entire city seemed to hold its breath. The community's response was overwhelming, but for the Alvarez family it was not enough. Each hour that passed felt like sand slipping through their fingers. Statistics told them what they already feared. The golden window to recover a missing person was slipping away. After 24 hours, chances plummeted. After 48, the odds grew grim. But they pressed forward, ignoring exhaustion, clinging to the thought that maybe Marissa was out there waiting to be found. On the second night, the family organized a candlelight vigil outside the coffee shop where she was last seen. Dozens of students, neighbors, and strangers arrived, holding candles that flickered in the wind. They prayed, they cried, and they promised not to forget. Reporters stood among them, cameras capturing the raw grief on the family's faces, broadcasting it across San Jose. For the first time, the city felt the pain of one family as its own. But the search was not without cruelty. Anonymous callers rang the Alvarez home with false claims, saying they had seen Marissa at a motel or that she had boarded a bus out of town. Each tip sent the family and volunteers rushing to new locations, only to be met with disappointment. The cruelest moment came when a man phoned, demanding money in exchange for Marissa's safe return. Police traced the call to a payphone, discovering it was nothing more than a scam. The family was left shaken, drained, and furious. Through it all, Marissa's parents refused to give up. Her mother clutched her photo at night, whispering prayers until her voice broke. Her father marked a city map with red ink, crossing off the streets and parks they had searched, building a record of desperation. They lived on black coffee and scraps of food, their bodies weary, but their hearts unwilling to rest. By the end of that first harrowing week, San Jose knew the story. The Alvarez family's desperate search had transformed into a citywide vigil for a missing daughter. But still, there was no trace of Marissa. Only a haunting question remained, lingering in every dark corner and whispered in every prayer. How could a young woman vanish in the heart of a bustling city without leaving a single trace? Among all the fragments of that October night, one detail stood out more than any other. A car. Not just any car, but a silver sedan that appeared again and again in witness statements, police notes, and later in the restored footage from the ATM camera. The silver car became both the strongest lead and the most haunting question in the disappearance of Marissa Alvarez. On the night of October 12, 2002, a man walking home from work passed the corner near the coffee shop where Marissa was last seen. He noticed a silver sedan parked along the curb, its headlights off, the engine faintly humming. The driver seemed to be waiting, his face obscured by shadows. The witness thought little of it at the time, assuming someone was picking up a friend. Hours later, when he saw news reports about the missing student, the memory returned with chilling clarity. That witness was not alone. Another account came from a taxi driver finishing his shift near Santa Clara Street. He told police he saw a girl resembling Marissa leaning toward a silver car, speaking briefly with the driver before the door opened. The light inside flickered for only a moment, then vanished. At the time, his statement was logged but not pursued. Investigators were focused on Marissa's friends and classmates, convinced the answer lay in her inner circle. The silver sedan, to them, was background noise in a city filled with cars. The ATM camera offered what should have been undeniable evidence. At 11:32, as Marissa walked quickly toward the lot, the blurry footage caught the outline of a vehicle idling across the street. Even in grainy black and white, the reflection of its body and the shape of its headlights were visible. Technicians in 2002 dismissed the footage as too poor to identify. They filed it away as a dead lead. For the Alvarez family, the car became an obsession. Marissa's father often repeated to reporters that she was not the kind of girl to leave with a stranger, unless something compelled her. He was convinced the driver of the silver sedan had been watching, waiting for the right moment. Neighbors who joined the family's search began noting down license plates of silver cars they spotted near campus, handing lists to police in the hope that one of them might hold the answer. The problem was scale. At the time, hundreds of silver sedans were registered in San Jose, many of them Toyota Camrys, Honda Accords, or Nissan Altimas, the most common models on the road. Without a clear license plate or distinctive mark, narrowing the list was like chasing a shadow. Police quickly lost patience, turning their focus back to familiar suspects. The car was reduced to a vague footnote in the case file, rather than the central piece of evidence it should have been. Yet the image of that car never faded from the minds of those closest to Marissa. For her mother, every glimpse of a silver sedan in traffic was a stab to the heart, a reminder of what might have happened. Friends who gathered for vigils whispered about it, wondering if the driver had been someone from campus or a stranger who had prowled the streets looking for prey. Years later, when the cold case unit reopened the file, the car returned to the forefront. Modern technology enhanced the ATM footage, pulling details from the static. What had once been a blurred outline was suddenly sharp enough to show the oval badge of a Toyota on the hood. That revelation, 20 years late, confirmed what the Alvarez family had long believed. The silver sedan was not just a coincidence. It was the key to everything. At the heart of Marissa's vanishing was not a mystery of chance or circumstance, but the deliberate movements of a driver who waited in silence. A driver who opened his door in the shadows and closed it on a young woman's future. In every cold case that lingers for years, there is a moment when investigators look back and wonder what might have been if the first steps had been different. In the disappearance of Marissa Alvarez, those missteps began almost immediately. When her father called the San Jose Police Department at 2 o'clock in the morning, the officer on duty logged the report, but reassured him that adults often choose to stay out late. The family knew their daughter better than anyone, yet their urgency was met with hesitation. That initial delay cost critical hours. For a missing adult, time is everything. The first 24 hours are the golden window. After that, the chances of finding someone safe drop dramatically. By the time officers canvassed downtown the next morning, the trail was already fading. Patrol cars circled the coffee shop and checked nearby alleys, but the search was cursory at best. Security cameras from nearby businesses were either not collected quickly or dismissed because of poor quality. One clerk later recalled police asking about tapes, only to leave without taking them. Days later, when those recordings were finally reviewed, many had been taped over. The silver sedan, which would later become the central clue, was also mishandled. Witness statements describing the car were noted, but investigators focused almost entirely on people in Marissa's immediate circle. Her ex-boyfriend, Miguel Torres, and a co-worker from her part-time job were both questioned extensively. Their alibis held firm, yet detectives continued pressing them while ignoring broader leads. To the public, this looked like diligence. To the Alvarez family, it felt like tunnel vision. Another error came in the handling of Marissa's phone records. At 11:48 p.m., her phone went dark near a downtown cell tower. In 2002, the technology to triangulate signals existed, but was rarely used outside of major cases. Investigators noted the last signal but never sought further analysis. Years later, when cold case detectives reapplied modern tools, they discovered that the phone had likely moved south out of downtown within minutes of shutting off. That crucial piece of information sat dormant in a file for 2 decades. The interrogation records from 2002 show other gaps. Suspects were questioned briefly, with little effort to verify details beyond their word. Miguel Torres said he had been watching a football game with friends. Detectives confirmed this with a few quick phone calls and moved on. Andrew Miller, her co-worker, claimed he went home after his shift and was online by midnight. His internet history was checked, but only superficially. No follow-up was conducted to rule out gaps in his timeline. In both cases, investigators cleared them quickly, but without the depth needed to be certain. Community tips also overwhelmed the investigation. Dozens of people called claiming to have seen Marissa at bus stops, convenience stores, even motels. Police chased nearly every one of these leads, burning through resources and time. While the most consistent clue, the silver Toyota, sat at the bottom of a stack. The Alvarez family grew frustrated, watching officers run in circles while their daughter remained missing. Perhaps the most painful mistake was communication. The family often felt shut out of the investigation, told only that police were doing their best. When they asked about the car or about reviewing additional footage, they were told resources were limited. That lack of transparency eroded trust. By the end of the first month, the Alvarez family had more confidence in their own nightly searches with neighbors than in the official investigation. Every cold case carries scars of lost time. In this one, those scars came from hesitation, poor evidence collection, and a fixation on the wrong suspects. The result was devastating. What could have been a strong, coordinated effort in October 2002 dissolved into confusion and wasted opportunities. For the Alvarez family, the truth was simple. Their daughter had vanished in plain sight, and the very people tasked with finding her had looked the other way. Those missteps would echo for 2 decades until technology and persistence forced the case back into the light. In the weeks after the disappearance of Marissa Alvarez, the Alvarez family clung to every fragment of hope that reached their doorstep. Each phone call, each whispered rumor, and each tip passed through police dispatch carried the possibility of answers. Yet with every spark of hope came a crushing disappointment. The endless stream of false leads not only drained investigators but also broke the fragile hearts of those who loved her most. One of the earliest tips came from a woman who claimed she had seen Marissa at a bus stop along Santa Clara Street. She described a petite young woman in a light-colored sweater with her hair tied back. The details sounded convincing enough to stir hope. Police immediately searched the area, pulled camera footage from nearby shops, and questioned bus drivers. The reality was harsher. The woman at the stop was older, with a similar build, but clearly not Marissa. What began as excitement collapsed into despair. Then came the cruelest blow. A rough male voice called the Alvarez home late one evening, claiming he had Marissa and demanding ransom. He gave no details of her condition or location, only threats about what would happen if police became involved. Marissa's father kept him on the line, trying to stay calm. But investigators quickly traced the call to a public payphone in South San Jose. Surveillance showed a homeless man using the booth. He later admitted it was nothing more than a scam to take advantage of the family's grief. The Alvarez parents were crushed. Their hope had been used as a weapon against them. More tips poured in. Some callers swore Marissa had been seen at a motel on Monterey Highway. Others insisted she had been spotted at a convenience store near Eastridge Mall. Police checked each report, reviewed security tapes, and questioned employees. Every single time, the truth was the same. The girl was not Marissa. The cycle of hope and heartbreak repeated until the family grew afraid of the ringing telephone. Even the well-meaning community sometimes added to the confusion. Flyers with Marissa's smiling face were taped to shop windows and bus shelters across the city. Strangers approached the family with stories of women they thought resembled her. Each new account demanded energy and time to verify. The Alvarez family could not afford to ignore anything, even when their instincts whispered it was wrong. For police, the sheer number of false leads became overwhelming. Resources were stretched thin. Detectives admitted later that the constant stream of bad information diluted their ability to focus on stronger evidence. Still, ignoring tips was unthinkable, and so the department chased each one, even as frustration grew. The toll on the Alvarez family was immense. Marissa's mother began to fear the sound of the phone, bracing for another cruel hoax. Her father filled notebooks with names, addresses, and timelines, building his own investigation alongside the official one. Friends who had once crowded their home with support began to drift away, exhausted by the cycle of raised hopes followed by bitter disappointment. Inside the Alvarez home, grief filled every silence. Marissa's room stayed untouched. Her textbooks remained stacked on the desk. Her favorite sweater lay folded neatly on her chair. At night, her mother sat at the window with a candle burning, whispering prayers into the darkness. Her father traced a map of San Jose with red ink, circling places they had searched, as if determined to leave no corner unchecked. False leads can wound deeper than having no leads at all. They raise families up, only to drop them into deeper despair. By the end of the first month, the Alvarez family realized they were not just searching for Marissa. They were also fighting against rumors, lies, and opportunists who preyed on their pain. The heartbreak of those weeks left scars that would last long after the posters faded from the streets of San Jose. By the end of the first year, the search for Marissa Alvarez had lost its momentum. What began as a citywide effort filled with posters, vigils, and constant news coverage gradually slowed. The bright face that once stared from every lamppost and bulletin board faded into the background of daily life in San Jose. For the Alvarez family, this decline felt like a second loss. Not only was their daughter gone, but the world seemed to be forgetting her. In March of 2004, the San Jose Police Department officially reclassified Marissa's disappearance as a cold case. To the investigators, it was a procedural step, a way to free resources for more urgent crimes. To her parents, it was a devastating blow. The paper notice they received confirmed what they already feared. The city had moved on. Inside the Alvarez home, time seemed frozen. Marissa's room remained exactly as it had been on the night she vanished. Her textbooks sat untouched on her desk. Her favorite sweater rested neatly on the back of her chair, and the faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air. Her mother often sat in that room, clutching the framed photo of her daughter, whispering prayers that someone, somewhere, would come forward with the truth. The community that had once rallied to the family's side also began to drift. The monthly vigils that had drawn crowds of students, neighbors, and strangers slowly dwindled. At first, hundreds came, candles glowing in the night. A year later, only a handful of close friends and the family remained. The flickering circle of light grew smaller, a painful symbol of fading attention. In the police archives, Marissa's file was boxed and shelved alongside hundreds of other unsolved cases. The folder contained incomplete interrogation notes, blurry security stills, and lists of false tips that had led nowhere. The ATM footage showing the silver sedan was filed away with the word "unusable" scrawled in the margins. Every failure, every missed chance, was preserved in silence. Her father, unwilling to accept closure, began to take on the role of investigator himself. He kept a thick notebook filled with names, phone numbers, and observations from conversations with neighbors and volunteers. He mapped out areas of the city they had searched, marking them with red ink. He saved every newspaper article, clipping them carefully, and storing them in binders. His determination became a quiet obsession. Her mother turned to faith. She lit candles each night at the small church near their home, praying for strength and for answers. The priest often found her alone in the pews after dark, whispering to the photo she carried in her purse. Her grief had hardened into ritual. Every 12th day of the month she returned to the church, even when attendance at the vigils had shrunk to nearly nothing. As years passed, Marissa's name was spoken less and less in San Jose. New tragedies, new crimes, and the rapid growth of Silicon Valley consumed the city's attention. Only on anniversaries did local newspapers revisit the case, often with small columns tucked into the back pages. Headlines would read, "Another year without answers," or "Family still seeks missing student." For the Alvarez family, these brief mentions felt like lifelines, proof that their daughter had not been erased completely. But behind closed doors, their grief weighed heavier with each passing year. The father's hair turned gray far earlier than it should have. The mother's shoulders slumped under the weight of sorrow. Their once lively home fell quiet, filled only with the ticking of clocks and the soft echo of unanswered prayers. When a case turns cold, it does more than stall an investigation. It freezes the lives of those left behind. For the Alvarez family, October 12, 2002 was not just a date. It was the moment time stopped. Every day afterward was lived in the shadow of that night. And though the world had moved on, they refused to. They would keep waiting, keep praying, and keep demanding justice, even as the silence of a cold case stretched into decades. As the years turned into decades, the case of Marissa Alvarez slipped further into the shadows of San Jose's growing skyline. The city transformed around her absence. Orchards gave way to glass towers. Quiet neighborhoods became tech corridors, and coffee shops turned into startup hubs. Yet, inside the Alvarez home in East San Jose, time stood still. The clock had stopped on the night of October 12, 2002, and for her parents, every new day was simply another reminder that their daughter had never come home. For the community, Marissa's name slowly faded into memory. Students who had once taped her flyers across campus graduated, moved away, and built lives of their own. Professors who had spoken about her disappearance in class retired, leaving behind only faint stories told to new generations. By the time 20 years had passed, most young people at San Jose State University no longer recognized her face. The Alvarez family never allowed themselves that luxury of forgetting. Each 12th of the month, they gathered at the small church near their home to light candles and whisper her name in prayer. In the early years, hundreds had joined these vigils. By the 10th year, only a handful of loyal friends remained. By the 20th, often it was just the family, the priest, and a few flickering flames. Yet they never stopped. The ritual was their way of defying time, of reminding the world that Marissa still mattered. Inside their home, the reminders of her presence were carefully preserved. Her room was left untouched, textbooks still stacked on the desk, the sweater she had worn that night folded neatly on the back of a chair. Her father kept adding to the notebook he had started in 2002, filling page after page with clippings, names, and handwritten notes. Over the years it grew into a thick archive, his personal testimony that someone had never stopped searching. Her mother aged visibly, her dark hair turning silver before its time, but she carried Marissa's photo in her purse everywhere she went. The police, meanwhile, reviewed the file only occasionally. Cold cases were pulled out every few years, sometimes assigned to new detectives, then quietly returned to the shelf. The notes grew no longer, the evidence no stronger. Each time the Alvarez family inquired, they received the same answer. No new evidence, no new leads. Please be patient. For the family, patience was no longer a virtue but a sentence. Every holiday felt incomplete, every birthday marked by an empty chair. The silence grew heavier, pressing on them with every passing year. Neighbors saw the toll it took. The father, once energetic and determined, walked with slower steps, his shoulders bent under invisible weight. The mother's eyes seemed to carry permanent shadows, her smile appearing only in brief moments with her grandchildren. In the city at large, Marissa's case became more of a cautionary tale than an active wound. Parents warned their daughters not to walk alone at night, often citing the girl who vanished in 2002. But her story was retold less as a personal tragedy and more as a vague warning, stripped of the depth of her life and the pain of her family. That distance wounded her parents most of all. To them she was not a symbol. She was their daughter, and she was still missing. 2 decades of silence does more than age a family. It reshapes them. The Alvarez parents no longer lived in hope of seeing Marissa walk through the door. They longed instead for truth, for a name, for an explanation. Yet, year after year, the truth remained buried. The unanswered questions echoed in their small home with the same sharpness as on that first night. Where did she go? Who was in that silver sedan? Why had justice taken so long? It would take 20 years, a new generation of detectives, and technology that had not existed in 2002 before the silence would finally begin to crack. In 2022, 20 years after the disappearance of Marissa Alvarez, the San Jose Police Department announced the creation of a dedicated cold case unit. The move came after mounting public pressure and repeated pleas from families who had waited decades for justice. Among the first files chosen for review was the Alvarez case, a haunting reminder of a young woman who had stepped into the night and never returned. For the Alvarez family, the news felt like a spark in the darkness. They had lived 2 decades with unanswered questions, watching anniversaries come and go, watching vigils shrink, and listening to the same tired phrase from officials: no new evidence. When detectives from the cold case unit arrived at their door with fresh notebooks and new technology, the parents cried openly. At last, someone was listening again. The new team was younger, many of them children or teenagers when Marissa vanished. They were determined to bring a fresh perspective to a file that had gathered dust. Their first step was to reopen every box of evidence. Out came the faded photographs, the blurry ATM footage, the lists of false leads, and the interrogation notes scribbled 2 decades earlier. Nothing was dismissed, not even the smallest detail. One detective specialized in digital forensics. He scanned the old ATM footage, long considered useless, into modern software capable of enhancing and clarifying images. Slowly, the grainy blur sharpened. What once looked like a shadow now revealed distinct features: A silver Toyota with an oval badge gleaming under a streetlight parked exactly where witnesses had claimed. The team stared in silence. A clue ignored in 2002 had resurfaced with undeniable clarity. Another member of the unit focused on biological evidence. Back in 2002, the technology to test-trace DNA from degraded samples was still in its infancy. Several swabs taken from Marissa's belongings and from a wallet found near the parking lot had never been fully processed. Now, with advanced methods, these items were retested. Early results showed Marissa's DNA, along with faint traces of another individual, an unidentified profile that did not match anyone in the original investigation. As the evidence grew stronger, so did the resolve of the team. They set up a dedicated room in police headquarters, covering the walls with timelines, photographs, and maps of San Jose. Strings connected dates and names. Every lead was reconsidered. Witnesses who had been teenagers in 2002 were tracked down as adults and re-interviewed. Some remembered new details, small fragments that had seemed unimportant at the time. One woman recalled a tall man with a stooped posture near the cafe that night. Another remembered the interior light of the silver car flickering before it pulled away. The Alvarez family was kept informed at every step. For the first time in 2 decades, they felt like participants in the search for truth rather than bystanders. The father brought out his worn notebook, filled with years of personal notes. Detectives copied pages, cross-checking his careful records against the official file. His dedication, once dismissed, now became an asset. The media caught wind of the reopening, and soon headlines filled local papers. Cold Case Unit revives Alvarez file. For a city that had nearly forgotten, the story felt new again. Social media lit up with speculation, frustration over past mistakes, and cautious hope that justice was finally within reach. For the investigators, the pressure was immense. They were not only chasing a killer, but also correcting the errors of their predecessors. Each discovery was bittersweet, a reminder that the truth might have been found long ago if the case had been handled differently. Yet the weight of history only fueled their determination. As the unit pieced the fragments together, one fact became clear. The disappearance of Marissa Alvarez was no longer just a cold case file. It was a puzzle finally being solved. A voice, long silenced, beginning to speak again. The team knew they were on the brink of uncovering the truth. They also knew that once the next piece fell into place, San Jose would never be the same. The cold case unit knew that their greatest advantage over the investigators of 2002 was technology. 2 decades had transformed the tools available to law enforcement. What had once been considered worthless or too blurry to analyze now carried the potential to unlock the truth. For the first time since Marissa Alvarez disappeared, the past could be restored with clarity. The team began with the ATM footage. In the early days of the case, detectives had dismissed the video as too grainy to identify a license plate or a face. It had been filed away, forgotten under layers of dust. Now, technicians digitized the tape, running it through artificial intelligence software capable of enhancing individual frames. What emerged stunned everyone in the room. Under the flicker of a yellow street light, a silver sedan became unmistakably clear. The oval emblem of a Toyota glinted on the hood. The headlights reflected against the pavement, as if the driver had adjusted them. Even the faint outline of a man in the driver's seat appeared, his posture slightly hunched, his gaze fixed on the street ahead. The detail was not perfect, but it was enough to confirm what witnesses had described. The silver sedan had been waiting, and Marissa had walked directly past it. Forensic experts also revisited physical evidence collected but never fully tested in 2002. A wallet found near the parking lot contained fibers and faint traces of skin cells. At the time, technology could not extract a profile from such a small sample. Now, advanced DNA sequencing pulled two profiles, Marissa's and an unidentified male. This was the first scientific confirmation that she had come into contact with someone else that night. Old security tapes from downtown businesses were also recovered. Most had degraded or been taped over, but some fragments survived in archives. With digital restoration, technicians pieced together brief glimpses of a silver car passing through intersections in the minutes after Marissa vanished. By cross-referencing traffic camera logs and old cell tower data from her phone, investigators were able to map out a likely route heading south out of downtown toward quieter neighborhoods. Even photographs from the original search were re-examined. Volunteers in 2002 had taken hundreds of snapshots as they canvassed alleys and parking lots. Stored in boxes, many were overlooked at the time. When scanned and digitally enhanced, one image showed the faint corner of a license plate on a car parked near the cafe. Though partially obscured, the letters matched a registration for a Toyota Camry, later linked to a local high school teacher. It was a detail missed for 20 years. The Alvarez family was invited to view some of the restored footage. When Marissa's mother saw the silver car appear clearly for the first time, she broke into tears. She whispered that she had always believed her daughter had been taken by a stranger, not by someone she knew. Her husband clenched his fists as he watched, furious that the truth had been visible all along, if only someone had looked closely enough. For the cold case unit, the restored evidence was both a breakthrough and a burden. Each discovery proved how preventable the 2 decades of silence had been. Each enhanced frame or DNA match carried the weight of missed opportunities, yet they pressed forward, determined not to waste another moment. The story soon reached the public. Local newspapers ran headlines about technology breathing life into forgotten cases. Television news showed side-by-side comparisons of the original ATM footage and the enhanced version, highlighting the clear outline of the silver Toyota. For San Jose residents, it was a shock. What once looked like static and shadows now revealed a predator hiding in plain sight. Technology had not only restored the past, it had exposed the mistakes of the present. With every frame sharpened and every sample tested, the noose tightened around the man who had escaped justice for 20 years. The cold case unit knew the next step was inevitable. They were closer than ever to putting a name to the shadow in that silver sedan. The breakthrough came not from a file or a photograph, but from the dark waters of a quiet lake. As investigators retraced the movements of the silver Toyota Camry linked to Marissa Alvarez's disappearance, they found an unsettling detail in the Department of Motor Vehicles records. The car had been registered in San Jose until 2003, then vanished from the system. There was no bill of sale, no report of an accident, no record of dismantling. It was as if the vehicle had been erased from existence. That absence set off alarm bells in the cold case unit. Cars do not simply vanish. If there was no paper trail, the most likely answer was that the car had been hidden. Detectives turned to a method increasingly used in solving long, dormant cases: underwater sonar. They spread maps of the city and circled potential dumping grounds, including the Guadalupe River, several marshlands, and artificial lakes in the southern part of San Jose. One location drew particular attention: Lake Almaden, a deep body of water with a reputation for swallowing cars and keeping them hidden beneath layers of silt. On a summer morning in 2022, a team of divers joined investigators at the lake. They launched high-powered sonar equipment from a small boat, scanning the depths. For most of the morning, the screens showed nothing but rocks and debris. Then, in the southeastern corner, a rectangular shape appeared beneath the mud. The outline was unmistakable: a sedan. Divers prepared to descend. Wearing black wetsuits and carrying oxygen tanks, they slipped into the murky water. Communication lines crackled as they reached the bottom. Within minutes came the confirmation. They had touched a metal frame, 4 wheels intact, coated in layers of mud. The divers surfaced and shouted the words that electrified the shoreline. "It's a car. Toyota." The area was quickly sealed off. Police tape surrounded the shore as forensic vans and fire trucks arrived. Journalists gathered behind the barriers, their cameras aimed at the water. The Alvarez family stood together, trembling as they realized that after 20 years, they were about to face the truth. Raising the car required delicate planning. After 2 decades underwater, the frame was fragile. Divers attached inflatable lift bags to the chassis. Slowly, air was pumped in. The surface of the lake began to churn as mud and bubbles erupted. Inch by inch, the silver roof broke through the water, coated in algae and sludge. The crowd gasped as the vehicle emerged, its once smooth body corroded and warped by time. On the shore, Marissa's mother collapsed into her husband's arms, weeping uncontrollably. For 2 decades, she had prayed for answers, and now they were surfacing before her eyes. To the Alvarez family, this was not just a car. It was a coffin holding the final moments of their daughter's life. The Camry was carefully pulled onto a large tarp to preserve evidence. Technicians in protective gear began their work, photographing every angle, scraping mud from the windows, and searching the interior. The stench was overwhelming, but no one left. Every person present knew they were witnessing the turning point in one of San Jose's most haunting mysteries. Inside the vehicle, fragments of human bone were discovered, along with a student identification card. Though warped and waterlogged, the faded photo and name were still visible. Marissa Alvarez. The car that had haunted her family for 20 years had finally been found, and with it came proof that she had never left that October night alive. The news spread across the city within hours. Television broadcasts showed live images of the mud-covered car being towed from the lake. Social media exploded with outrage over the police failures of 2002 and renewed calls for justice. For the Alvarez family, the discovery was both devastating and liberating. They had lost hope of finding Marissa alive, but at last they had answers. The lake had given up its secret, and with it, San Jose braced itself for the next revelation. Who had driven that car into the water, and why had it taken 2 decades to uncover what was there all along? When the mud-covered Toyota Camry was hauled onto the shore of Lake Almaden, investigators knew they had uncovered the key to the mystery. Yet what lay inside the vehicle stunned even the most experienced members of the cold case unit. Beneath the rotted leather seats and layers of silt were fragments of human bone. In the back pocket of a door panel, technicians found a faded San Jose State University student identification card. Despite water damage, the photo and name were clear enough to read. Marissa Alvarez. The car was not just a vehicle. It was a time capsule holding the truth of her final night. Forensic experts moved quickly. Every inch of the car was examined, every fiber collected. Along with the bones, investigators discovered strands of long black hair wedged in the crevices near the rear door. At first, it was assumed to be Marissa's. But when the DNA was analyzed, the results shocked everyone. The hair did not belong to Marissa. It belonged to someone else. That discovery changed everything. If the hair was not hers, it meant the killer had left behind a trace of himself. The strands were rushed through advanced DNA sequencing. When entered into the combined DNA index system, the computer compared the sample against millions of profiles. Hours later, the system delivered a match. The profile belonged to Richard Hanley, a high school math teacher living in San Jose in 2002. Hanley had once been briefly questioned in the early stages of the investigation. He lived alone in Willow Glen, taught at a local high school, and drove a silver Toyota Camry registered during the period of Marissa's disappearance. In 2002, detectives accepted his statement that he had been home alone watching television. They made no effort to verify the alibi and quickly moved on. Now, 2 decades later, science proved that his DNA had been inside the car where Marissa's body was found. The cold case unit knew that one test result would not be enough in court. They needed fresh, indisputable evidence linking Hanley to the crime. Surveillance was arranged. Detectives followed him quietly as he went about his daily life. By then, Hanley was 65 years old, retired from teaching, and living quietly in a small apartment. He visited a coffee shop every morning, reading the newspaper and discarding his cup in a public trash bin. On the 3rd day of surveillance, officers collected one of those cups. The saliva left on the rim was sent to the lab. Days later, the results came back, a perfect match to the DNA from the hair in the Camry. The probability of error was 1 in several trillion. The evidence was irrefutable. With confirmation in hand, the cold case unit prepared for the arrest. On a foggy Tuesday morning in March of 2024, a team of officers surrounded Hanley's apartment. At 6 o'clock, they knocked on his door. When he appeared in his bathrobe, bewildered by the sight of armed officers, he was immediately placed in handcuffs. Neighbors watched in disbelief as the quiet teacher they had known for years was led away. Some shouted in shock. Others wept, realizing a killer had lived among them for 2 decades. News of the arrest spread quickly. Headlines across the Bay Area read, "San Jose cold case solved, high school teacher arrested for murder of student." Parents of former students expressed horror that their children had once sat in his classroom. Social media erupted with anger over how close investigators had been in 2002, only to let him slip through. For the Alvarez family, the arrest brought both relief and sorrow. They had waited 22 years for justice, but it came at the cost of endless nights of grief. When detectives delivered the news, Marissa's father clutched his notebook of notes and said quietly, "We told them about him. Nobody listened." Her mother wept, holding her daughter's photo to her chest, whispering that at last, Marissa had a voice again. The DNA breakthrough had done more than identify a suspect. It had revealed the devastating consequences of investigative failures and the power of persistence. After 2 decades of silence, the truth had finally been pulled from the shadows. But the fight was not over. The trial that followed would determine whether Richard Hanley would pay for what he had done. The arrest of Richard Hanley stunned San Jose. A man once seen as a quiet, respected teacher was now accused of murdering a young woman and hiding her body for more than 2 decades. Yet the arrest was only the beginning. The Alvarez family still needed justice to be sealed in a courtroom. What followed was a trial that forced the city to relive the night of October 12, 2002, and expose the failures that had allowed a killer to live freely for so long. In the spring of 2025, the case went to trial at the Santa Clara County Superior Court. Reporters filled the benches. The Alvarez family sat in the front row every day, clutching Marissa's photograph. Across the aisle sat Hanley, older now, his once dark hair completely gray, his posture slouched, his eyes hidden behind thick glasses. The quiet teacher was gone. In his place sat an accused murderer facing the full weight of the law. The prosecution built its case methodically. They began with the discovery of the silver Toyota Camry in Lake Almaden, presenting photographs of the vehicle being pulled from the water. Jurors studied the images in silence, the corroded frame and the mud-covered windows making clear that this was not an accident but an intentional disposal. Next came the DNA. Experts testified that strands of hair found inside the Camry belonged to Hanley, and that saliva recovered from his discarded coffee cup provided a 100% match. Charts, graphs, and explanations of probability filled the courtroom, all pointing to the same conclusion. Hanley's DNA was in the car where Marissa's body had been found. The prosecution also called witnesses from 2002. One man recalled seeing a silver sedan idling outside the cafe that night. Another described a tall man with a hunched posture near the parking lot. Though memories had faded, their accounts aligned with the evidence. Even more damaging was testimony from former colleagues, who remembered that Hanley abruptly sold his house and disappeared from social circles shortly after Marissa vanished. The defense tried to discredit the evidence. They argued that DNA could have been transferred in other ways, that contamination was possible after so many years underwater, and that memories of witnesses were unreliable. They painted Hanley as a victim of circumstance, a man whose life had been unfairly upended by old evidence dredged up decades later. But the weight of science and the consistency of the timeline proved too strong. The most emotional moment of the trial came when Marissa's mother took the stand. Holding her daughter's faded student identification card, she described the night Marissa vanished, the endless years of silence, and the pain of watching hope slip away with each passing day. Her words left jurors in tears. "We kept her room ready for 22 years, she said softly. "We waited for her every night, and while we waited, he lived free." After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 2 days. On the morning of their decision, the Alvarez family held hands in the courtroom, whispering prayers. When the foreperson rose and announced the verdict, the room fell silent. Guilty of murder in the first degree. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The Alvarez parents wept openly, clutching each other as if the weight of 22 years had finally been lifted. Hanley sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the table before him. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. For San Jose, the trial was both a reckoning and a release. It forced the community to confront the failures of 2002, but it also proved that justice, even delayed, could still prevail. For the Alvarez family, the verdict did not bring Marissa back. Nothing ever could. But it gave her story an ending, and it gave her memory the dignity of truth. Outside the courthouse, as cameras flashed, Marissa's father spoke quietly to reporters. He held up the worn notebook he had carried for 2 decades, filled with names, dates, and details. "We never stopped looking," he said, "and now neither will anyone else. Marissa will not be forgotten." Justice had finally arrived, 2 decades late but undeniable. The silence was broken, the truth exposed, and the city of San Jose was left forever changed by the story of a young woman who vanished into the night and the fight of a family who refused to let her disappear. For more than 20 years, the disappearance of Marissa Alvarez haunted San Jose. Tonight, the truth is finally known. Justice came late, but it came. Her story is a reminder that no case is ever truly forgotten, and that persistence can bring the past back into the light. If you want more untold stories of justice delayed but never denied, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every story matters, and every voice deserves to be heard.